If Sans had had more than a shred of magic left, he would have pulled all his blasters at once and obliterated half the building. As it was, he jerked back, nearly choking in terror. The child wasn't moving, but menace radiated off it like heat from a furnace, eyes boring into him as its grin widened. Sans looked around wildly for an escape. The windows were too small, but maybe he could... A sharp whistle split the air. The barrier snapped on, and the child vanished. Sans was sitting upright in bed again, in the dark, awake, panting as though he'd run a mile in a few seconds.
Sans, I'm so sorry.
The light snapped on. Frisk stood at his bedside, wide-eyed, clutching the neck of her robe.
I didn't think I would have that nightmare again before we woke up. I thought it'd be fine.
She took a step onto the bed, leaning over to grab his humerus.
Sans? Sans! Please say something!
He shook her off, and she stumbled backwards, falling into the armchair.
What the fuck was that?
Frisk sat up and pulled her robe tighter around her shoulders.
I'm sorry. I should have warned you. It's the reason I have that barrier up in the first place.
She swallowed hard.
It shouldn't happen again.
It had better not.
Sans snarled.
What the hell was that thing anyway?
I don't know.
She looked so miserable that Sans wanted to smack himself, but he was too unnerved to lie and tell her that it was okay. He was shaking so hard that he could almost hear his bones rattle. For a solid minute, the only other sound in the room was the wind blowing outside the shuttered windows.
I hope you had a good talk with Papyrus,
Frisk said presently, with a decent attempt at calmness, placing her palm on the bedroom door to dissolve the thick barrier.
I can see why everyone likes him so much. It's good to know he hasn't changed.
The skeleton grunted, hoping she was smart enough not to ask him any questions about him changing.
Yeah, thanks for fixing that up for us. Sorry I pushed you just now.
It's fine. It was an accident.
Frisk fiddled with the key in its lock.
You know, Sans, I'd like you to help repair the damage you caused, but if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. I wasn't thinking of how much it was to ask, staying an entire month.
Sans stared at her. She wouldn't turn around. Finally, he said,
The crap, lady? You already let me talk to Pap. That was the whole reason I tried to bust out of here. Why wouldn't I stick around and make it up to you? You really think I'm that bad?
There came a soft knock at the door, startling them both.
Your Eminence?
It was a male voice, deep and pleasant.
Are you awake, my lady? Please forgive my intrusion, but His Holiness urgently requests your presence.
Daylight was showing through the closed shutters.
Yes, of course. I'll be there in a moment,
said Frisk, running her fingers through her hair, eye twitching as she found a tangle. Sans watched her and watched her move to unlock the door, feeling a different sort of unease.
Wait a sec. Wait, didn't you bar the big doors last night? How'd he get...
The man knocked again.
Just a moment.
Frisk repeated, turning the key. She glanced behind her.
What, Sans?
The door banged open. Before she could blink, a stranger in tattered clothes rushed in, his arm raised to strike. The boss monster was already moving. The man lunged, and there was a sound of steel hitting bone. The priestess found herself staring at the tip of a knife, inches from her face, jutting from between massive skeletal fingers.
Sans!
Cried Frisk, twisting around to look at him. Red clouded Sans' vision, but one clear spot remained. With his free hand, he reached out, corralled Frisk, and gently maneuvered her behind him, fingers forming a protective cage. The other hand flexed briefly, then backhanded the intruder so hard that the man rolled clear out of the bedroom, hitting the work table with a crack and a thump. The skeleton clamped his teeth on the dagger's hilt and pried the blade out from between his knuckles, jerking his head to fling it to the other side of the bedroom. There was technically nothing to pierce where the knife had been lodged, but it still stung. He glanced down to be sure Frisk was unscathed, then edged forward into the workroom. To his great irritation, the man wasn't dead. He was not only conscious, but pulling himself up on the table.
The fuck are you?
Demanded Sans. Only the vague awareness that Frisk was watching kept him from grabbing the guy and pinching his head off. The stranger wiped the corner of his mouth on his sleeve, squinting against Sans' literal glare. He was gaunt and generally gross-looking, but had moved fast enough and aimed the knife with enough skill to peg him as a professional killer.
What's a big-ass talking skeleton doing here? They said you got sold off already. So it was you bashing that wall down. What the hell do you even do that for? It took me all goddamn night to get out.
Sans glanced at the office door, which was ajar. Several pieces of broken masonry had been moved out of the way by shoving the door repeatedly from the inside. The guy must have snuck into the office after Frisk left, while Sans was in the bedroom, but before he blocked the entrance, and gotten trapped in his hiding place by all the debris piled against it. It would have been kind of funny, except that if Sans really had left, Frisk would be dead now. The young woman was leaning on Sans' femur, peering around his outspread fingers. He could feel her trembling, which only intensified his urge to kill something.
I know you. You spoke to me after the service last week. You said I
Had a positively angelic voice.
The man leered at her, showing several broken teeth.
It's truth, but I needed to be sure exactly who you were. The last High Priestess used body doubles sometimes.
He looked her up and down.
Gotta say, I like yours a lot better.
She shuddered. Sans leaned down, not taking his now flaming eyes from the assassin.
You need this piece of crap alive, Frisk, or can I take him apart now?
Frisk!
The man cackled, slapping the work table with a dirty palm.
That's your real name, lady. That's gotta be the dumbest...
And just like that, he launched himself at Frisk, closing the distance and ducking between Sans' legs like a snake. He whipped another knife out from his belt and would have sliced her neck open if Sans hadn't been ready to nudge her out of the way, grabbing the assassin on the backswing and slamming him against the open door. Before Frisk could react, Sans turned his head to the opposite wall and said,
Holy crap, what's that?
As she whirled around, Sans plucked the knife out of the man's hand and gave him one squeeze, very quick and very hard.
Whoops. My bad. Nothing there.
He said to cover the sound of ribs breaking. The priestess started to turn back.
Stay where you are.
Sans ordered, pulling the assassin out of her line of sight, stepping into the workroom and closing the door behind him.
Oh, no you don't.
He said loudly, as if chasing the man down.
No, stop! I just want to talk to... Oh no!
The assassin didn't seem to appreciate the theatrics, especially since Sans was carrying him straight to the broken wall. Ignoring the man's feeble protests, the skeleton drew his arm back and murmured,
Now think about what you've done, pal.
Before tossing him out into the open air. His only concern was that the bastard would make a lot of noise on the way down, but it seemed he'd knocked the wind out of him. Ha! By the time Frisk peeked out of the bedroom, the assassin was long gone. Sans shook his head and turned from the opening.
Nope. Sorry, I couldn't catch him before he told us who sent him.
He wished he had his jacket. His hands had nowhere to go.
You alright, Frisk?
The priestess gulped and wiped her eyes on her sleeve.
No, I'm not.
She slid down, back to the wall, and wrapped her arms around her knees. She didn't seem to be physically hurt, so for the moment, he said,
Okay.
And stared at the slightly open office door.
Son of a bitch, I'm gonna tear that card a newborn. Do you think he knew you were sleeping in there, or was it just a convenient place to crap?
Frisk's shoulders had hunched and her face gone pale. Sans ground his teeth, cursing his stupidity.
Well, it's over. He won't bother you again.
He reassured her, coming to kneel beside her.
At least that cover story about the assassin ain't a lie now, right?
She didn't look reassured at all. With the threat of bodily harm removed, Sans was out of his element again, with no clue how to help her. He wasn't much good at saying nice things, and he didn't have sound-based magic to hum at her. Should he explain that this was an inconvenient but probably solvable problem that she'd always known might come up? No, that would be dumb. She already had enough problems. She didn't need to worry about more shitheads getting in here to hurt her. As long as she was an important and politically vocal person, it wasn't like she could do much to... Wait, that was it. Sans had the idea.
Actually, you know what?
He waited for her to shake her head.
You were saying this weird stuff about me leaving once I'd seen Pap. Before we talk about that, I gotta ask, what's the going rate for a bodyguard around here? Good one, not just some moron following you around trying to look scary.
She bit her lip, a habit Sans had noticed and been distracted by several times already.
It depends. A skilled full-time personal guard? Anywhere from 50 to 100 dinar
Oh, nice. I can probably...
an hour. I only sleep a few hours a night, so
Frisk gave him the ghost of a smile.
if you're offering your services, Sans, I'd be glad to accept. Would a salary of 1,000 per diem be acceptable?
Now he really was at a loss for words.
1,000 a freaking day?
He repeated blankly. Frisk nodded. Her shock seemed to be fading as she thought aloud.
You could pay for your clothes in 1 day, and I can negotiate the repairs down to about 10 days worth. After that, well, wheat is about 5 dinar a bushel.
Despite herself, she sniffled again.
You could buy a lot of wheat, or beans, or wedding cakes, or literally anything else you want to take underground with you.
He was patting himself on the back when, without warning, Frisk's smile faded.
I'm sorry, I didn't listen to you before I unlocked the door. Thank you for staying with me. And thank you for saving my life.
Shit.
Was as far as Sans got before he lost even that bit of coherence. His senses were already heightened by the unexpected danger, his soul still feeling a little queasy at how close she'd come to dying right in front of him. To cap it off with Frisk looking up at him like this with big eyes, messy hair, and her robe falling off her shoulder was more than he could handle. She never looked bad, but right now, damn. Sans didn't realize he was reaching for her until his fingertip brushed her cheek, toying with a wavy lock of her hair.
Don't mention it. It's the least I can do.
Frisk pulled away, face flushing, but only in momentary surprise. He devoutly hoped that she'd get up and go get dressed, or maybe pack her things, buy a fast horse, and leave the kingdom forever. But that damnable woman didn't know any better than to smile and take his hand, or at least rest her hand in the space between two of his fingers.
Just so long as you keep in mind that you're still my apprentice.
She said with mock sternness.
Do you promise?
Neither of them understood what happened next. Sans felt something welling up that made him want to grab her, and he didn't know what would happen next, but he wanted it so badly that he backed away in sudden alarm. All he knew was that this feeling, this energy, had to go somewhere, and if he directed it at her, he could accidentally mash her into paste. The only thing he could think of was to whip around, look for something else to latch onto, and focus his attention on the pile of stones, etc., by the office. His magic was barely available, or so he would have said a minute ago. Fueled by the whatever it was, though, and with the barrier gone from one of the walls, Sans didn't even have to think about it. Frisk jumped back as the heap of debris by her office began to glow red, rising into the air and flying into the broken wall. To their mutual astonishment, the outside bricks and internal structures zipped back into place first, followed by more bricks, mortar, stone, wood, and finally the glass and lead of the windows. When the dust settled, the entire facade had been imperfectly but almost entirely restored, the floor sagging under the windows. Sans stared at his hand, still breathing heavily.
Huh.
He said by way of explanation.
Indeed.
Frisk absently ran her fingers through her hair again, working out a tangle as she examined the wall.
Did I know you could do that?
I didn't know I could do that.
Now that the unfamiliar energy was gone, Sans found he wanted to sit down. He sat down next to her, comfortably but not dangerously close.
Well, I need a break from life.
He said, which got a laugh out of her. He snorted.
Break. I actually didn't mean that one.
Frisk gave a long, long sigh.
We'll knock down your fee to 3 or 4 days of repairs,
She said gravely. Sans couldn't help grinning.
I always knew there was more to life than money.
She kept a straight face until he added,
Making it pretty again is gonna be a pain in the glass.
whereupon she broke out in hysterical snorting laughter, which cracked him up in turn and guaranteed a minutes-long feedback loop. As nice as this all was, Sans was a little concerned when he got under control and she kept going and ended up nearly gasping for breath.
You okay, kid? You need some water?
Oh, Lord.
Frisk wiped her eyes on her already damp sleeve.
Sans, you're killing me.
Silence. Frisk thought about it and promptly buried her head as far between her knees as she could get it.
I didn't do that on purpose.
She said, muffled and sheepish. Sans shifted his weight. He wasn't ready to admit to himself how badly the whole attack had scared him, much less to her. Just to check, he considered escaping again. Maybe once she was letting him walk around with her outside, and his magic was naturally restored. And now, less than 12 hours after doing his damnedest at it, he couldn't believe how much he hated the idea. No problem, really. He could chalk it up to her letting him connect with Papyrus and needing to make it up to her. Also, holy shit, 1,000 dinar every day for the next 25 days? That was as solid a set of reasons as he'd ever come up with.
Well,
He finally said.
guess you'd better get your scary witch dress on and go tell everyone about this whole mess.
He snapped his fingers, making an odd click as something occurred to him.
That's right, I got both those knives off him. Maybe someone can take a look at him and figure out who he was, where they were from.
Frisk raised her head, staring into space.
No.
She said, as if to herself. The boss monster looked askance, and she smiled in a small, nasty way he hadn't seen before.
We won't say anything.
The smile grew.
I'll go about my day as if nothing happened, except I'll be accompanied everywhere by a 10-foot skeleton. Whoever set him after me will have no idea what happened, and it'll drive them absolutely mad. We can see if anyone incriminates themselves, but oh, I'm going to enjoy this.
It's a neat idea, but the garbage threw itself out already, remember?
Sans indicated the repaired wall.
Someone's bound to notice him.
The young woman did a remarkable impression of shock and distress, eyes wide and mouth hanging open before she murmured,
That poor man jumped from such a height? What a hideous tragedy. Peace be upon his soul and those of his loved ones.
Damn.
was all Sans could say. He might have killed the guy and covered it up, but he couldn't look that cute telling a bare-ass lie. Also,
Ain't you a priestess? Isn't that a little,
Frisk scowled. Despite her bedhead and furry robe, she was the very image of sternness, and yes, determination.
I was taught that it is my duty to aid the weak and be an instrument of justice against people who, for example, want to stab me in my own bedroom when I've done nothing to harm them. It is no sin to protect yourself.
The skeleton shrugged, holding his hands out.
Okay, that's enough. I think I love you. What do I sign up to kill people for you?
The priestess laughed.
I bet you say that to every girl you try to escape from. And please, don't kill anyone.
She glanced at the clock, and her amusement melted into panic.
Dirt! I have matins in 20 minutes.
She sprang to her feet and made a beeline for her dressing room.
Can you please find my veil for me?
She called before she shut the door. Sans also got up, muttering,
Dirt? Seriously?
as he retrieved the veil from where it had blown onto the table. As an afterthought, he returned to the bedroom and picked up the assassin's daggers. He studied them, saying out loud,
I think I'm screwed, is what I am.
then placed them on the nightstand. He heard Frisk emerge from her dressing room and went to meet her as she asked,
Sans, do you have my...
He handed the veil over.
Thank you, sir.
She threw the veil over her head and adjusted the headdress over it.
May I assume that you haven't been to many religious services? Well, we have an oral contract, effective immediately, and I'm going to church. So you are going to church.
She inclined her head, moving toward the double doors.
Follow me.
And of course, he did.